What a wonderful conversation I was able to eavesdrop on just
Mhm.
now, listening to these powerful Black women of faith talk about what motivates them and what keeps them going. And certainly I resonated with so much of that.
Mm.
I was really stricken by Ekimini's last statement that she refuses to be catechized in despair. Catechized in despair. I've thought about this past Sunday. I tuned into Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago for Elders Sunday. Reverend Dr. Otis Moss Jr. was preaching. And what he was preaching about was powerful, but I'm not going to talk about that here today. I'm just going to use something that he said that stayed with me. He said, those of us who are people of faith, uh, especially those who proclaim the gospel on a regular basis, we are accustomed to using the text. We're accustomed to using scripture. But every once in a while, there ought to be a scripture that uses you. There ought to be a text that uses you. I've been thinking about that as I prepare for this election. When I leave here, I'm going to tune into the debate, but I wanted to leave you with a thought about that. There is a scripture that's using me these days, and it's found in Numbers 27. It's the story, a seldom told story, nestled in that First Testament that I have been living with and through in these challenging moments. It is the story of five sisters who dared to challenge the oppressive systems, sentiments, and interpretations of scripture designed to silence their voice in their day. While I won't read the entire text to you tonight because I only have a few moments, it is important because of the socio political realities of both then and now that I say their names. Their names are Mala, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. These sisters were biologically connected, but that's not the most important thing about them here. What matters most is they were united in purpose. The text says their father, Zelophehad, died in the wilderness without having a male heir. And according to Mosaic law, women were prohibited from inheriting land back then. But these sisters knew what was at stake for them if their father died and they had no brother. They knew that their inheritance was in jeopardy because they weren't married, and their land would go to relatives or distant relatives, and they refused to collude with their own erasure. So the text says that they spoke up. These sisters knew long before Zora Neale Hurston made it clear, if you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say that you enjoyed it. They spoke up and they challenged the status quo. They spoke up and they stood up to the hierarchical structure of their day and took their complaint to the source of their concern. This was no time for them to sit this one out. I imagine these sisters assessed the danger before them and decided consciously to resist. I imagine they huddled somewhere in their tent and analyzed their predicament, and they decided which one of them was the best strategist and allowed her to frame a plan, which one had the greatest oration skills, and decided that she would be the spokesperson, who would do the behind the scenes work to research the law and make sure they knew exactly what they were talking about. And by the time they went public, they had a plan and they had a bond that caused them to want to stand together. Now, it is not lost on me in this text that, in spite of the fact there must have been many other women in that camp, Scripture does not record that anybody stood with them, just these five sisters standing alone. And I bring that up in this moment of tension in our society because sometimes, my sisters, you just have to rock with the ones who will rock with you. You just have to know who is on your side and who is not on your side. You just have to know what is at stake for the benefit of not just you, but for generations to come. When we talked about hope, or when I listened to these sisters talk about hope, Dr. Terman said that one of the things that brings her hope is her children. Her children. This fight that we're in right now is not just about us, it is about our children as well. And what these sisters did in this text, by standing up for what they knew they deserved, in spite of patriarchy, in spite of laws that said they shouldn't have it, in spite of opponents who wouldn't stand with them, in spite of having to stand by themselves, what they did in that moment was demand what was theirs. And I am suggesting to you that this is a moment when Black women must demand what is ours. We're not asking for a handout. We're not asking for sympathy. We are simply declaring that we are made in the image of a beautiful God, made in the image of one who has given us power and authority, made in the image of one who says we get to decide what happens with our own bodies. We get to decide what happens with our own children. We get to decide what happens in our neighborhoods, not because we need you to do something for us, but because it belongs to us. We have earned it. And in this moment, my sisters and my brothers, if you are listening, I am suggesting that we must stand together in solidarity in spite of contrived religious rhetoric disguised as revelation. We must stand together in solidarity in spite of the fact that every woman even will not stand with us. We must stand in solidarity with a plan, with an agenda, with a strategy that says we know what we ought to have and we are coming to get what's ours. In this passage of scripture that I encourage you to read on your own, these women end up standing before Moses and Eleazar the priest and all of the community. And the interpretation that Moses has, and the interpretation that the priest has, and the interpretation that the community has of scripture says that they are standing out of order and out of place. But thanks be to God for Moses, who decided that perhaps there was a possibility that he had misinterpreted what God intended. And Moses didn't answer out of his own flesh, but the scripture says he went and asked God what God would have him to do. And God told him, these sisters are right. They deserve exactly what they're asking for. And not only do they deserve it, but rewrite the law in such a way that those who come after them will also receive their inheritance if they're in this situation. This is our moment. And yes, God is with us. And yes, God stands by us. And yes, ultimately, God is in control. But God also expects us to step up with courage, with boldness, with what in Hebrew scripture is known as anivah. Anivah, that we translate as humility. Anivah, as a word that we have misinterpreted in our English translation, which literally means in Hebrew to stand in the space completely that God has given to you. This is our moment. And we must demand more than just a win at the polls on November 3rd, November 4th, November 5th, whenever these election results come out. That is not the end. That is the beginning. Let us strategize, because what we deserve, we have to go and get. God bless you. I hope you will tune in to the debate. Not because it's something we haven't heard before, but because we need to be informed so that our strategy is clear. Have courage, my sisters. Have courage, my brothers. When we stand, we do not stand alone. God bless you.